And we're back for a crucial session about digital regulation. To open this session, I'm really pleased to be joined on stage by Didier CASAS. Didier CASAS is General Secretary for Bouygues Telecom. I guess you do have a perspective on those matters of regulation. Of course, a lot of questions there. But first, when you think about regulation as a telco, what do you think about?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for welcoming me. Bearing in mind, perhaps first precision that when I speak today, I speak as head of regulation of Bouygues Telecom and not as president of the French Telco Association, just to keep it clear. Yes, I would like perhaps to share with you 2 or 3 convictions that we have about this situation of regulation and OTT regulation particularly. First conviction that we have and that I would like to share with you is about the recent European regulation on net neutrality. We think, to put it clear and simple and short, that it's quite a good regulation. It's a very important text. And why? Because it relies on 2 very important aspects for us. The first one, of course, is to guarantee that internet has to be open, and at the same time, that services could be managed by operators. And we are convinced that, of course, it's very important if you keep in mind what will be the future services, the future internet services. The today services are about, for example, sharing economy, sharing cars, sharing flats, and so on. Very, okay, fine. The tomorrow services will be about remote surgery, about self-driving cars. It means very high-value services relying on very high-performance networks. And if you want to have very high performance services or networks, you have to allow operators to manage their services and their networks. That's why we think the possibility we have in the frame of this new text is quite good, and that's my first conviction. The second one is about platform and services and OTT. I suppose you will not be very surprised if I say that we think that net neutrality is not only about neutrality of networks, but it is also about neutrality of platforms and services. When you have a look to this new regulation, I've just said that we think it's quite a good text, but if you look at this text, you have very little think about regulation of platforms. At domestic level, in France, for example, we have very little think as well in the future so-called for a digital republic bill about fairness of platforms. But in our view, it's not sufficient in the field of regulation of platforms. And we think that it is not logical. Why? Because net neutrality was invented in the United States to face a very particular situation. This situation was the aim was to balance the power of operators and to support content providers, services providers. In Europe, of course, the situation is completely different. Thanks to years and years of regulators and governments' policies of very low prices and very high competition within operators, our situation is not as strong as American operators, of course. And we are facing services providers very strong. So, I mean, this situation is quite the contrary. So it is not so logical to begin in Europe by regulation of neutrality of networks as it was the case in the United States. We think, and I call for an urgent regulation about platforms, I mean neutrality of platforms. And we have a few ideas about that. Let me provide you with one or two. First of all, we are completely convinced that we need interoperability of services and data portability, including, of course, including personal documents, but, for example, as well, playlists. We think it could be very important. Second idea, if we speak about neutrality of platforms and services, personal data security and protection, which must be the basis of digital trust. This is my second conviction, and I suppose we will, in the round table, perhaps speak about that. My third one, as a conclusion, is that Europe has to consider digital economy as a whole, including not only startups, as it is done today, but as well also operators. If you have a look, Europe has been a pioneer of the telecoms waves. Europe has invented 3G, has invented standardization in telecom industry, but Europe has not been able to avoid the destruction of its telecom industry. And we can say, I suppose you will agree, that Europe missed the internet wave. We have no giants in the internet industry. We are now at the beginning of the digitalization of healthcare, education, transport, and I suppose whole economy in the coming years. And I think there is a risk that Europe may abandon the operators in these policies, and operators are day after day, I mean, building the ecosystem's foundation. Earlier this morning, we had an amazing presentation about healthcare, e-healthcare. And I was very interested in that presentation, but I noticed that during all the presentation, there was no word about the networks. But you know what, Marjorie? If you don't have any networks, any connectivity, you will not have any service. And that's why we think that the beginning for our reconquest to avoid kind of digital recession is to be sure that operators will be, I mean, in the boat of these policies.